1 week season.
Welcome to Solo Ship. It is week 14. We got a slightly delayed Solo Ship this week. JM, we missed last week. I was traveling for Thanksgiving. How were your holidays?
Holidays were good, man. We just had a weird pre-show where I got the times mixed up because I recorded with Pete yesterday instead of doing it live today. So my schedule was off, and I was sitting here 40 minutes ago waiting for you, and I was like, man, I hope everything's good with John. But I was totally wrong.
It's okay, actually. I'm just catching up. Because I was working out. I'm just catching up on some of the injury news. So the delay actually helped me.
We do have that. Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of which, it's a big injury slate.
Yeah, it looks like it's becoming one. Holidays were good. Last week's slate was good, but how about you? Good week last week?
It was kind of up and down. I saw some, lifelong friends and family I don't get to see very often, but I didn't win any money on the slate, so it wasn't that great of it wasn't that great of a weekend. Yeah. On to week 14 now, and we're really getting into the last quarter of the NFL season. And I always feel like that makes a difference. We start to see a lot of the situations that we're seeing this week. We're starting to see teams that are out of it, completely out of it. Teams that are completely out of it playing each other and, potentially, angling for draft picks. We start to see the bad weather creep in. Thankfully, not too much of that this week. And then, we start to see injuries. The injuries just keep piling up. And this week in particular, it was funny. I'm starting my content a lot later in the week than I normally have or historically have. And everything, that I started reading today and late last night, all the shows I started watching were talking about how we've got Garendo in San Francisco, and he's going to be the obvious value piece. And then we've got to spend up on, any number of running backs, primarily Alvin Kamara and Saquon Barkley. But now we might have two backup running backs that we are having a difficult time getting away from. We've got, not only Garendo, but it looks like Breece Hall is going to miss for the Jets. And that puts Braylon Allen in play. I guess, what are your initial thoughts on the week?
Yeah, so the Braylon Allen news I saw, kind of between shows. And so I got to dig deeper into it. It seems like Isaiah Davis is going to be the pass catching back. So there is some component of, are we playing a yardage and touchdown back at high ownership? We've also seen Braylon Allen. I mean, he's such a big dude. He's explosive, not as explosive as Garendo, but he's a big dude. He's explosive. He's capable of breaking tackles and scoring touchdowns. So I think he's kind of he seems like more of a barbell type of play, right? Like, and we've got Darnell Mooney in a game where I think just talking like price range, right? Darnell Mooney in a game where I think the Falcons are going to throw a lot. The Vikings face the highest opponent pass play rate in the NFL. We've got Jacoby Myers, who's consistently seeing all these targets. So it's like you've got Braylon Allen down here, you've got Garendo down here, but also you've got this stuff, right? And who's going to post the highest score on the slate? Maybe some people think Alvin Kamara. I don't get it, but probably Saquon Barkley, right? So it's like, to me, if you're playing one of the, like, for me, I'm playing Saquon in every roster. I'm playing single entry 3 max this week, and we'll get to that here in a little bit, the Saquon Kamara stuff and all that. But I'm going to play, like most people are going to play one of these high-priced running backs. So then if you're playing Garendo and Braylon Allen, you're playing one of them in the flex. You're technically then choosing them against these 5K wide receivers, who there's like a lot of good value there as well. So yeah, I mean, I think that Braylon Allen's not a slam dunk, but I think he's a sharp play. I think that Garendo, the way I've framed him, is like, can he score 14 points? Yeah. Like, I don't think he's going to bomb, but he could score a score that, like, people who rostered him are happy with the price tag. People who faded him, like, they're not missing out. I think that's possible, but I also think like 14 to 26 points or 14 to 28 points is his range. Like, I'd rather just play him and take the upside. And if he scores 14, 16, 17, that's fine. I think I can still win a tournament with that. That's kind of how I see those two spots. The thing is, you get into MME, you can get like trickier and trickier with how you approach it, but single entry 3 max, I don't mind just locking in Garendo and Saquon, and then you kind of worry about other things from there.
Yeah. So a couple of things. I think Saquon versus Kamara is the question of the week, or one of the big questions of the week. I've got a whole like tirade I can go on about it. I get the sense from reading your write-ups that you're in favor of Saquon, and I am too, over Kamara, even considering the price, because Kamara I think is $1,000 cheaper. Kamara's projecting, and for most of this season has been projecting higher than Saquon Barkley, to the point where every Sunday morning I just get up and switch their projections because I like Saquon Barkley a lot more. I think Kamara is projected higher. I think over the last 7 weeks, or last 7 games, Kamara's averaged 18.5 DraftKings points per game. Saquon Barkley's averaged 28.5, 10 more. And Kamara still projects higher than Saquon Barkley. And I think the reason is receptions that may never come against this Giants team. I think you just kind of have to keep, each week you remove another New Orleans pass catcher and go, well, I guess the targets have to go to Alvin Kamara, but they don't. And especially against this Giants team, which I think is going to be led by Tommy DeVito, might be Drew Lock. I have so little interest in the Giants this week. I really don't know who's playing quarterback for the team. But it doesn't strike me as a game where they're necessarily going to have to overload Alvin Kamara with targets, so those points or half points don't necessarily show up. And so I think Saquon should be projecting higher than Alvin Kamara in half point per reception and full point per reception. And so I greatly prefer paying up for Saquon. On FanDuel, it is a little bit more difficult. I think Kamara is at a bit more of a discount, even just relative to every player on the slate. So I'll probably play more Alvin Kamara on FanDuel, ironically, than DraftKings. But I haven't really priced that out yet because the backup running backs, I think Grendo and Braylon Allen are both absurdly cheap on FanDuel. I think they're both 5,200, and I'm going to be playing a lot of those two guys. And so then I'm going to lead into my second rant, which is the backup running back rant, which is I think I want to be over the field on both of these guys. And I'm just going to use maximum salary, close to the maximum salary in most of my lineups naturally. And I'm going to be playing a lot of these guys. I think the field tends to underestimate the price savings we get, how important salary is. So when you get a guy that has the possibility of a full workload, it's something I want to be over the field on. And especially people just kind of log in Sunday morning and say, well, I want to be different. These guys are seeing really high ownership. But they should be seeing really high ownership. Actually, across all sports, everything except for discounted Major League Baseball hitters, I think people tend to discount the really good value guy too much, saying they just want to get different. I think Braylon Allen, I'm seeing over under 2.5 receptions. So that just at sports books, that tends to indicate he should be involved in the passing game. That should help him. And then Grendo, is in a good spot. I think he's probably the most talked about player this week. Those are my thoughts on the backup running backs and Alvin Kamara versus Saquon.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, and that's a key thing, right? On this particular week. Well, one of the things for me with all the passing attacks, whether it's or all the passing spots, whether it's the Rams and Bills or the Falcons and Vikings or Jameis Winston or Aiden O'Connell, or you can go down the line. I think you could almost. It's like when people spend all this time doing their picks on show, picks against the spread on shows, and then they're 46%, and you're you could literally ask your kid every week, and you'd be as likely to get 50%. It's I think that you could probably close your eyes. I could ask my kid which of my 5-year-old, which of these teams do you want me to pick, and I'm going to be as likely to get it right as just digging into the logic and research on this particular week. And what I mean by that is nothing really separates among these, and all of them can have pluses, positive cases made for them, negative cases made for them. So if you're getting different at running back, where things are pretty straightforward, you're getting different at running back and then still taking on the same amount of risk at other positions, And so to me, it just makes sense. To me, strategically, what would make us the most money over time on this slate, again, we always talk about, it doesn't mean it's going to play out that way on the small sample size of 1 week, but what would make us the most money over time on the slate is just play with the sharpest thing at running back, let the field make mistakes. And then, you got to get weird at pass catcher and wide receiver anyway, because that's a quarterback and wide receiver, because that's kind of the state of the slate. So you're kind of take some risk on there regardless. So why not do it alongside really sharp plays? And I'm with you on the Saquon Kamara thing, where to me, once you get up to 8K, 9K, the price tag doesn't matter. What we're talking about is who puts up the highest score on the slate, right? And so Saquon has topped 36 points 5 times this year. Kamara has topped 19 points 4 times this year. It's I don't get it. I do think the higher dollar contest you get into, the higher Saquon's ownership is going to be. But and I think people too are looking at, well, Taysom Hill's gone, right? So now Kamara gets those touches, but Kendre Miller's back. So I don't necessarily think that he sees this spike in workload. I think it's just his normal workload that he's been getting. So I think Kamara is perfectly fine play. I will not play Kamara without Saquon. Because if you're doing that, you're saying he outscores Saquon, right? Or without Saquon or Hurts, right? Because if Saquon's failing, it's probably not from the Eagles failing. It's from Hurts rushing in a bunch of touchdowns. So it's I think the idea of playing Kamara without one of these Eagles, you're saying Kamara outscores both these guys, which is a pretty low probability bet. And it's a bet that a huge chunk of the field will probably take. And so sharper to say, if I'm playing Kamara, I play him alongside one of these guys. And that's how you really kind of gain an edge with Kamara rosters, I think.
I hadn't really thought about the Jalen Hurts, Alvin Kamara combination because it's probably not. It's not going to pop out on like unoptimal lineups or just start running projections because they're probably too expensive to like pair, but they're not. Like you can just lock them both in and see what you get with your lineup, and that's a really sharp play, especially if I think for single entry or for smaller field or they kind of contest this show is hypothetically geared towards is that. Yeah, you could, that's a perfectly obvious way that Saquon fails is Jalen Hurts gets 3, push touchdowns. And then Alvin Kamara maybe does get the receptions and, some yardage and then that's the running back you want to get at that price range. And so the Jalen Hurts and Alvin Kamara combination actually does make a lot of sense. If
you don't need a wide receiver with Hurts, which is weird, right? But they don't pass the ball enough at this point. But two of the last 3 times that Saquon didn't top 29 points, Hurts put up 31 and 35. Because again, it's like he's getting the touchdowns on the ground that Saquon's not getting in those situations. And so you don't actually need to pair him with anybody, you just play him naked. But you gain that edge off of, doing something, a very unique combo that makes a lot of sense, but the people just won't be on.
You took away my segue. Yeah, I was going to say, but the next topic on my conversation list was, wait, if I was going to play Jalen Hurts, who would I stack him with? Because I do think Jalen Hurts is he's more appealing play on FanDuel. We generally have a lot more salary to work with, or a little bit more salary to work with. I think he's relatively cheaper on FanDuel as well, and he scores better because of the touchdowns.
Yeah,
the receptions are only half a point, so touchdowns are more valuable. So yeah, I was going to ask, if you were going to play, let's say Jalen Hurts was a few $100s cheaper on DraftKings, like who would you stack him with? And my thought process was. I may not need to stack him with anybody, just because I'm playing him for the rushing touchdowns. Like if you take his rushing touchdowns away, he's not that high scoring quarterback.
He got 8 games since the bye. He's topped 22 passes twice. He's topped 25 passes once. He hasn't topped 28 passes. So yeah, it's hard to get a score at cost on AJ Brown or even Devontae Smith or even Grant Calcaterra. Like you just probably don't get a tournament winner from a pass catcher in a Hurts tournament winning game. Like you said, you're paying for the rushing touchdowns.
Yeah, but he's scored rushing touchdowns in 6 of the last 7 games, and as many as 3 rushing touchdowns. So it's not like this rare occurrence. It did occur to me that we're starting to see some like Saquon for MVP steam, and I wonder because there's been some thought that he's been like kind of selfless, like he just lets Jalen Hurts get the touchdowns. And it occurred to me like I wonder. If the team's up, 35-7 against Carolina in the 4th quarter, if Jalen Hurts runs out of bounds at the 1 and they put Saquon in for 3, rushing attempts from the goal line, trying to help him like get some MVP stats, because he really has gained steam, some steam in the MVP market. And I do think that the players care about that kind of thing, particularly for a guy who's got a reputation for having been selfless through the season. So if Saquon runs in 3 1-yard touchdowns, just save this.
Wouldn't surprise me. Sirianni's talked publicly this year about like understanding that it's important to get players these stats and these milestones, and like Saquon's he needs to average like 120 yards a game to break Eric Dickerson's record. It's 40 years old for most rushing yards in the season, right? And like he could actually get there in 4 games, the same number of games, 16 game season, same number of games as Dickerson. If he's averaging 150 a game, well, he can get 200 here against the Panthers. So yeah, I just think it sets up really well for Saquon. And again, this show, like you said, is hypothetically, ostensibly about single entry or smaller field stuff, but tighter builds. But yeah, that's what I'm attacking this week. And so I will be just playing Saquon and Garindo and not overthinking those spots, and then getting different at other spots or beating the field at other spots. I should say you don't even have to get different from there because the combo isn't going to be that high owned. And then you add in one of these Raiders pieces, which is what I'll be doing. The combo is not that high owned, and you do something different from there.
So, I think this is probably the latest in the show we've ever started to get to the topic of game environments. Is there a game environment? You kind of said it. I think it kind of is just this week. It's much more of a finding value week than we got to target this game environment week. Is there anything that's like sticking out to you as like a best in game environment, or do you think you'll probably just pick some players and rotate the stacks around those lineups?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Like, And that's this is kind of indicative of how I see this week, right? Like, I think that this stuff we've talked about is the core of the week, because then you're like, well, let me at least lock in these higher certainty things, and then I figure out like what stacks do I want to chase, because there's not really anything super high certainty. I saw it this morning, like Kyler is going to be one of the higher owned quarterbacks. 2 weeks ago I was like, Kyler against Seattle, you got this barbell thing. It's either gonna be high scoring or low scoring. It ends up being a 6-16 game. Nobody was on it, right? Like if it had hit, I'm way ahead of the field. I end up way behind the field. Now 2 weeks later, there's so little to like that people are like, yeah, what about Kyler? Right? It's kind of a week like that. So I think Kyler's viable. I think Aiden O'Connell is viable. I think Jameis is viable. I think either quarterback in Bills and Rams. I think either quarterback in Vikings and Falcons. I don't even think that's the full extent, right? We already touched on Jalen Hurts, and then people are going to be on Will Levis. I prefer that in large field play, but you can justify it. People are going to be on Caleb Williams. I don't love the play because, it's much easier to run against the 49ers than to pass, but would it surprise us if the 49ers are up 17, right? And the Bears just let him freelance and he ends up putting up a big second half. We've just seen a few others. It's like, yeah, I just don't think there's anything that stands out as clearly the sharpest spot. I don't think we get any real slate winners at quarterback unless it's like Jalen Hurts putting up 30 to 35 or Josh Allen, which seems unlikely, right? Given the course of the season and the way that they've been calling things, but Josh Allen having to take over this game and putting up 32 to 35. Outside of that, I don't think we get any real slate winners on this slate, and nothing really stands out as clearly better than anything else unless you see something I might be missing.
No, I agree. I think, to be totally honest, I am probably going to pick a core of value players and just rotate stacks around.
Yeah.
I think you can make an argument. We just talked about Jalen Hurts and Alvin Kamara is something that's definitely interesting to me. And not pairing Hurts with a receiver, and then using Saquon Barkley on the majority of the rest of my lineups. So I think that's an environment ever since Detroit just demolished was Jacksonville. When I was like, oh, we should always keep in mind that sometimes a team has a really high implied point total, and we just think it's going to be a blowout. But we should keep remembering that team.
Yeah.
I think if there's one game environment that I kind of interested in being over the field on, is probably Atlanta, Minnesota. The teams allow the second and fifth most receptions per game. It's not a total that necessarily stands out, and Minnesota hasn't passed a lot this year, but I'm kind of interested in that game environment, and in particular being over the field on Justin Jefferson. I think he's a guy that's not going to see a lot of ownership. I don't know if I can play Saquon Barkley and Justin Jefferson together.
I built one last night that I really like, so
okay.
You certainly can do it. Yeah,
maybe I can. Yeah. I think people are kind of forgetting about Justin Jefferson. He hit 99 yards. He hasn't had a touchdown. He hit 99 yards last game, right? So that 3-point bonus would look, if you got one more reception for one more yard, that's a lot more points. And he hasn't had a monster target game, but I think he's had at least 8 targets in 9 out of his last 10 games or something. So he's just very much in this range of 8 or 9 targets. But if Atlanta is a team that you beat by passing, they've got Justin Jefferson, so he's a guy we shouldn't be forgetting about. And I think on DraftKings, he's $1,000 cheaper than he was a month ago. Tyreek Hill hit 7,300 and everybody went berserk. Justin Jefferson, I think, is just 7,800. So that's a player I definitely want to be over the field on. Your thoughts on Justin Jefferson?
Yeah. And I mean, again, because of the price point, I do think that if you play him without Saquon, I see it as a bet on him outscoring Saquon, right? I can find the extra 1,200 to get to Saquon if I think Saquon significantly outscores JJ. But I really like the idea. Same thing with Kamara, same thing with an Achane or whoever else, right up in this price range. I like the idea of finding a way to play them with Saquon, because then you're kind of telling this story of Saquon puts up the 36-pointer, but also okay, so this whole slate, all the players on this slate, 10 games, 20 teams, there have been 9 scores all season of 36 plus DraftKings points. 5 of those 9 have come from Kamara, right? I mean, from Saquon. Then 1 from Kamara, 1 from Judy, 1 from JSN, 1 from whoever else it was, right? So probably if Saquon puts up 36, the second best score on this slate is 27 or 29 or 30, right? So it's if JJ puts up 25, even 26, I don't care that I paid $8K 8K for him, practically 8K for him, right? And like he didn't hit 4x salary. It's like that's still one of the better scores on the slate. And then you pair that with Saquon, like you could end up with 60 points from these two guys, and most people won't get that. And so, yeah, I just think that JJ is one of these guys who, yeah, he's underwhelmed for the price, he's underwhelmed for the expectations, but if you can find a way to play him that you feel good about the roster, you are getting like probably 20 to 25 points, even on the lower end. And he still has that blow up potential of like, oh, Justin Jefferson put up 33 points. Does that surprise us? Right. So yeah, I think it's a really sharp play this week. And it's definitely one I've been like playing around with. Hey, how do you make this work with a Saquon roster? So, and yeah, I like that game environment. I think that game environment is like, you know me, right? I always preach against like Keenan Allen in the past because like he needs the volume to hit. I always preach against Drake London because he needs the volume to hit. This is like the 1 week where I'm like, no, I kind of like Drake London as a one-off because Minnesota faces the highest pass play rate. And so you would expect the Falcons to be throwing a lot here. You expect double-digit targets for Drake London. You expect double-digit targets or close to double-digit targets for Darnell Mooney. So yeah, I think the whole Atlanta passing attack is viable this week as one-offs. I think that's a game to potentially stack from either quarterback. Darnold, a little bit of a better play than Cousins, but Cousins only 5,500, certainly capable of putting up 28 plus points. And so, yeah, I think it's an interesting game and probably I'm with you. The game that stands out the most to me.
Yeah. And I mean, we've got the narrative thing with Cousins going back to Minnesota. I think it's an interesting game that you can stack. I think Drake London is a little bit underpriced on DraftKings. Darnell Mooney is kind of underpriced on FanDuel. And so, you fit those guys in with like Justin Jefferson. If you do put in Saquon Barkley, you actually end up with some value Saints if you want. Like, at tight end, you could go Juwan Johnson and then Kevin Austin. So yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting idea. Let's go with the value Saints players and then, play Jefferson and Saquon Barkley. Beyond that game environment, one other, game environment that I had some interest in was Chicago and San Francisco. Particularly if Bosa is out. I think Caleb Williams is an interesting play. The idea that like maybe Chicago, like if Chicago really wants to do something this season, like they want to get Caleb Williams going, right? They want him to put up some pretty good numbers, have some pretty good games, even if it's in a loss. Then everybody's pointing, well, Caleb Williams, looks like the quarterback of the future. And teams are starting to get to that point of the season where it's like, well, what do we want to point to at the end of the year and say we did well to save our jobs? And it could be Caleb Williams throwing for, 300 yards or 400 yards. I guess, thoughts on that Chicago San Francisco game. You kind of brought it up earlier in the show. And like, who would you pair Caleb Williams with?
I mean, who do you pair Caleb Williams with? I don't know, right? It's so weird. Probably two guys, though, because it's going to be on volume that he ends up hitting. And yeah, DeAndre Swift's got this quad issue. So, it looks like he's going to play, but not 100%. So, yeah, certainly makes sense. And down that narrative street that you were going down, like Thomas Brown took over as the interim OC, took over as the interim head coach now, and he was kind of a rising name, right? He got that Panthers OC job last year, and then there was such a bad situation in Carolina. Now it's been such a bad situation in Chicago, but he could certainly raise his stock by, having this offense put up some numbers down the stretch and be competitive in this game. So I think that he has something to play for, and Caleb Williams has something to play for. Maybe the rest of the team will have something to play for as well. It's Caleb's one of those where I keep kind of being like, he could hit, right? And I don't think I'm going to end up on him on tighter builds, but like, he's also definitely not a guy I would argue against, if that makes sense, right? To where it totally makes sense. Probably not the direction I'm going, but I don't have a problem with like, I don't consider it a not sharp way to go. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And then we actually haven't touched on I think the highest total game of the week, which is Buffalo and the Rams. And I think some of it has to do with price. Like if you look at the players in that game, they just tend to like nobody's really hurt. Like guys are really more coming back. And so nobody's underpriced. Josh Allen, I think, is the most expensive quarterback. Then you've got like the Rams offense, Puka, Cooper Kupp, Kyron Williams, they're all healthy and they're all expensive. But I actually have my notes like Amari Cooper is actually underpriced for from this game. 5,100. Like he's a guy that we, he's obviously like got talent. We wanted him to go to like a really good team with a good quarterback. And he just hasn't put up any numbers. But part of that could be due to injury. Now he's only 5,100. Any thoughts on that game environment? And like I know like Amari Cooper caught my eye in that game, and he's somebody you've been a fan of in the past. So thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, Amari was on my first practice build of the week, and it's one of those where you got to go on blind faith, like the only guys in this passing attack who have gone for 4x their salary have been Curtis Samuel and Matt Collins when there were injuries, right? And so that's just the nature of how this offense is playing. But you also kind of like step back and you're like, yeah, but doesn't he have like a 30-pointer in him at some point this season? Aren't they going to unleash him at some point? Maybe it's like in the playoff, maybe it's in a game like this. And I'm with you. Yeah, I like the way you framed it, where you're like, there's really nobody injured in this game, because when we get to this point in the season, like, Jacoby Myers and Brock Bowers are clearly, Brock Bowers, I wouldn't say underpriced anymore, but Jacoby Myers clearly underpriced. And these Falcons receivers clearly underpriced. And then Garindo's stepping in with the injury, and the Browns wide receivers, no Cedric Tillman, that concentrates things a little bit more on them. And we kind of look for spots like that, right, where you're getting a little bit more than 50K in salary cap because of the way things shape up. And that's not really the case for the Rams, and that's not really the case for the Bills. But I do think that Amari's not a guy who we can follow any logical path to say why he hits here, but he is one of those guys where it's like, yeah, if you're going to throw in that final upside piece, he certainly fits in that discussion. So I don't have anything like sharp to add, but I also don't have any arguments against Amari. And even this game environment, like it's hard to see Puka and Kupp really paying off salary here, but then it's also hard to see a lot of players on the slate paying off salary. So couldn't Puka put up 25? And if we said like 25 from Justin Jefferson would be really valuable, same goes for Puka here. Zone heavy defense, which traditionally that's better matchup for Puka. So yeah, I mean I think that there's things to think about in this game. I think what we probably see is it plays to the total, and at cost. That doesn't mean anything that really helps us win a tournament, but maybe a few players who could belong on a tournament winning roster, right? They're not the reason you win, but they're not hurting your roster. It's hard to know who those players would be, but there's also an outside chance that it plays all the way to the upside, and then you get like some smash scores. And I think Amari is certainly in that mix of guys who could do that.
Yeah, I actually, thinking about it, I think it's a game that I want to have. If I'm playing like 6 single entry rosters, I probably want to have one be centered around this game, and because it could hit to the upside. Like if we look at this game, Sunday night or Monday, and that was the highest scoring game of the week. It was an indoor environment. We had Josh Allen, Matthew Stafford. Just nothing jumped off the page in optimal lineups. But when they actually played the games on the football field, that it was the highest scoring game of the week. But I could also see like the Bills' defense just shutting the Rams down. And that it's a game that plays for the total, and just because the pieces are expensive, nothing gets there. But it's probably worth that risk in some double-digit percentage of my lineups. So it's a game I'll probably play some of. And then you mentioned the two other games environments I wanted to touch on. The Tampa Bay and Raiders game is interesting because I think Brock Bowers and Jacoby Myers are going to be popular, but they're playing for the underdog team that has like a 20-point implied total. I'm actually kind of interested on the other side of the game. I'm actually interested in Baker Mayfield and Mike Evans, assuming Evans is able to suit up. I think he's got a hamstring thing. But I think people are going to Bucky Irving and maybe going to the running game. The Raiders just give up a lot of points, like in all ways. I think they've given up 21 passing touchdowns. Is this a game that you'll attack in like game stacks, out or just outside of the Jacoby Myers and Brock Bowers value pieces?
Yeah, I don't have Baker down on my list, but I do have Mike Evans down on my list. So kind of, I guess, maybe a little bit of a hedge there, where I have a harder time seeing Baker throwing it enough to get to, like 25, 30 points. But I see like the pathway to Evans kind of in this concentrated offense getting there. So I like the backs. I like Evans. And I do like Aiden O'Connell because, he's got 4 of his last 5 games with 31 plus pass attempts. He's put up a score that you'd be really happy with at this price. One was 17.9. The other 3 were 20 plus. One of them was like 22 something. One of them was 25. And the only game with 31 plus pass attempts where he didn't hit a good score was against Pittsburgh. Right. So against Tampa, you expect 31 plus pass attempts. And I certainly think, he's capable of putting up a nice score and opening things up on a roster. But yeah, I mean, I think this is an interesting game environment. What was the other one that you were thinking about?
Actually, Cleveland and Pittsburgh. And I think the Jameis Winston thing is where he might just air it out. I'm going to be heavily interested in the Steelers defense, despite playing some Browns. But actually, I'm also interested in, I think the Browns give up the most yards per catch in the NFL. And you've got George Pickens on the other side that's got some narrative surrounding him this week. Right before we started the show, I was reading some quotes, him going back and forth with the Browns defensive backs. He's just in the media, but Pickens is a player that can take it 80 yards. And so there probably isn't going to be a ton of passing volume on the Pittsburgh side. But maybe I'm interested in George Pickens and or Calvin Austin. I think Austin's got a concussion issue, but he's always cheap and his price is always the same. He always seems to get there. And
I know, right?
His price never goes up. Nobody ever plays him. But yeah, I think both those guys are in play. And then, I think I haven't seen projections updated because I think Tillman is going to be out. So you've got Jerry Jeudy and Elijah Moore there, and a David Njoku. So that's a game environment that doesn't necessarily need to go berserk to get there.
Yeah,
because of the pricing. But one long Pickens touchdown maybe sets off that game environment.
Yeah, the fact that Jameis is probably going to throw it 40 plus times, the fact he's going to be aggressive, and the fact that Tillman's out, so it really concentrates on these three guys. And then again, the fact that the Browns, you don't probably see more than 28-ish pass attempts from Russ, but they're really aggressive on defense, and so they give up a lot of big plays. And the Steelers have Calvin Austin looks like no injury designation. So yeah, you got Calvin Austin and George Pickens who can both score from anywhere on the field. I think that Calvin Austin's at this point, week 9 onward, to me, you're always kind of looking for the cheap with upside wide receiver. It's the guy who most of the time is going to score 4 or 5, but maybe once a season, twice a season, 3 times a season, he's going to score 15 plus 20 points, right? And nobody's on him. And that unlocks these high price guys who have higher certainty with high ceilings. And that's typically how you win tournaments deeper into the season. This week, Calvin Austin's the only viable option below 4K of guys who can do it. But he's gotten to 19 plus points twice. He got 16 points another time. He had 10 last week before the concussion, right? So I think that he's an interesting piece. And Pickens, we keep waiting and waiting for the blow up game, but we know he's capable of it. And so even though we haven't seen it yet, doesn't mean that he's not sharp at 6,800. So I like that shout. I think you can play Jameis. I think that, obviously you've got some barbell risk there, but the far right side of the barbell is 27 to 30 Jameis points. And, it just keeps chucking it, picks up enough points. And I'm with you on that. I wanted to also mention when you said earlier, the game environment that the one that you're most drawn toward, right? You said Atlanta, Minnesota. I was also thinking before I was I bet he's going to say Rams and Bills. And that was kind of the second one you went to. So I do think that those are kind of the top 2 most interesting ones. And then you kind of get to these other, because I don't think Kyler's a bad option either, right? People are going to be on him and that can play to the upside. I think that there's just lots of different spots you can be this is sharp. And that's why I want to kind of gravitate toward what I feel a lot of confidence in at running back, and then be I got to pick and choose at stacks anyway. I'm not going to feel great about it regardless. So at least I'm taking something I feel high confidence in, and that the field is going to be underweight what they should be on. And that's, I think, the way to win this week.
Yeah, I think it is. Things get interesting the deeper we get into the season, and we're starting to see that take form as we hit week 14. That just about does it for my thoughts for the week. Any closing thoughts?
No, none for me. Glad we got the time figured out. I was sitting here typing up my article. I guess I'll just keep getting a move on this. I hope nothing happened to John. He's 30 minutes late, and it turns out I was 30 minutes early. So we were at that point of the season, brain scrambled, and but I think there's edge on this week. I'm excited to attack this one.
Yeah. That'll do it for Solo Ship for week 14, and we'll see you guys next week.